Shelly Miscavige, wife of the leader of Scientology, David Miscavige, was once a prominent figure in the church until she inexplicably vanished from the public eye. Aside from a couple of unconfirmed and pretty concerning sightings, no one has seen Shelly in 17 years now, leaving many to wonder what happened to her and if she's even still alive. In addition to various allegations of harassment, intimidation, abuse, fraud, human trafficking, and many other criminal activities, the church has reportedly been linked with a number of suspicious deaths and disappearances, leading to some terrifying theories regarding Shelly's whereabouts. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. In order to understand the circumstances surrounding Shelly's disappearance, it's important to have some knowledge of the principles of Scientology in general, so I will be providing the necessary context, but it's far too complex for me to go in depth about everything, so I'll include some links in the description if you want to learn more. Scientology is an extremely controversial religion that was founded in the 1950s by American author L. Ron Hubbard. Although it does meet the criteria to be classed as a religion, many have likened it more to a cult, and it does actually check a lot of the boxes. Hubbard is widely rumoured to have said various things suggesting Scientology was founded with the purpose of making money, including, "You don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion." And, "The way to make $1 million is to start a religion." Scientology was not actually Hubbard's first attempt to start something that could have turned into a cult. In May 1950, he released a book titled Dianetics: The Modern Science of Mental Health. Dianetics was basically a rip-off of psychoanalytical theory, with a few added drops of snake oil. Hubbard had made a habit of adapting the writings of others, presumably hoping no one would notice. In fact, most of his autobiographical tales had apparently been stolen from the true life stories of others, and his estranged son stated that 99% of what Hubbard ever wrote or said about himself was false. Hubbard taught that the memories, or engrams, that were stored in the unconscious mind, or the reactive mind, later caused psychological and even physical problems. When these memories are shared with an auditor, almost all illnesses could be cured, from arthritis and asthma to cancer and diabetes. These teachings were later transferred over to Scientology. Although the book was poorly received by the press, scientists, and medical professionals, it was immediately a commercial success, and led to the formation of 500 Dianetic auditing groups across the US. Hubbard established the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation, and through it, reportedly took large sums of money with no explanation of how he was spending it. The initial success of Dianetics didn't last long though, as just 3 months after the release of the book, Hubbard hosted a presentation with an audience of 6,000 people in Los Angeles that ended up being an absolute disaster. In addition to his claims that auditing can cure all illnesses, he also stated that it would lead to a perfectly functioning mind with an improved IQ and photographic memory. Imagine the embarrassment then, when he introduced the audience to a woman named Sonia Bianca, telling them that she had gained perfect memory thanks to auditing, and during the demonstration, she forgot the colour of his necktie. Many audience members walked out on the spot, and Hubbard's reputation was ruined, for some time at least. A millionaire named Don Purcell helped fund a new foundation in Wichita, Kansas the following year, but this only lasted a few months, as a court ruled that the Wichita Foundation was liable for the unpaid debts of its defunct predecessor in New Jersey, and Don filed for voluntary bankruptcy. Hubbard resigned after accusing Don of being bribed by the American Medical Association and emptied the foundation's bank accounts, partly through forgery. Already you have an idea of the type of man Hubbard may have been. He wasn't going to make his millions as a sci-fi writer, but throughout history, the combination of quackery and naive people has proven to be a profitable market, and he knew that. During the Dianetics era, Hubbard was also involved in a few personal scandals. A few months after the release of his book, he began an affair with an employee, and seemingly in retaliation, his wife Sarah also had an affair with a man named Miles Hollister. In early 1951, Sarah and Miles visited a psychiatrist to discuss her marriage with Hubbard, and she was warned that she was in grave danger, and that Hubbard should be institutionalized. Sarah, Miles, and the psychiatrist contacted Jack Maloney, the head of Hubbard's foundation in New Jersey, requesting funding for hospitalization, but Jack told Hubbard of these plans, and that night, Hubbard kidnapped Sarah and their one-year-old daughter, hoping to play an Uno reverse card and get Sarah declined as insane. His plan failed and he let Sarah go, without her daughter, and sent a letter to the FBI in which he claimed that she and Miles were communist infiltrators. After the story was covered in the news, Hubbard's first wife wrote to Sarah, stating, quote, "Ron is not normal. Your charges probably sound fantastic to the average person, but I've been through it. The beatings, threats on my life, all the sadistic traits you charge, 12 years of it." In June, in order to get her daughter back, Sarah was left with little option but to agree to a settlement in which she signed a statement written by Hubbard, claiming that the press had misrepresented her story and that she had always believed he was a, quote, "fine and brilliant man." The tactics Hubbard used in his personal life to manipulate the people around him would later be mirrored in the tactics used by Scientology to keep members in check and silence any opponents. After the failure of Dianetics, Hubbard recharacterized his ideas as a religion, Scientology. Although the basic principles of Dianetics were carried into Scientology, they were put on steroids and surrounded by various other wild claims and beliefs. The goal of Dianetics was to reach the superhuman state of clear, illness-free, with an elevated mind, but the goal of Scientology went beyond this, and aimed to reach a godlike state called operating thetan. In Dianetics, Hubbard claimed memories from early life cause later problems, whereas in Scientology, he went as far as to claim that these memories could have come from past lives. To aid in the auditing, Hubbard created a device, similar to a lie detector, called an electropsychometer, or e-meter, but unsurprisingly, this wasn't exactly an original idea. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung had used a similar device in a study of word association nearly 50 years prior. Hubbard claimed his device did much more though, and had the ability to reveal an individual's innermost thoughts. It's worth noting that the process of auditing has been independently tested and it failed, but Hubbard claimed that they didn't do it right. He founded the Hubbard Association of Scientologists, or HAS, and allowed others to set up their own regulated branches, or orgs, organised as franchises, where the franchise holder paid 10% of their income to the HAS. What started out as a branch of alternative medicine was transformed into a religion, for tax purposes and to protect Scientologists from charges of practicing medicine without a license. Of course, for it to be a religion, there had to be more to it than just auditing. It needed some crazy backstory to imply it wasn't all just something Hubbard made up off the top of his head. Enter Xenu. Xenu was an extraterrestrial ruler of a galactic confederacy 75 million years ago, consisting of 26 stars and 76 planets, including Earth. The civilization was similar to ours in the 50s and 60s, with aliens wearing clothes of that time and using cars and trains, etc. that looked the same. In order to maintain power and solve the problem of overpopulation, Xenu, aided by psychiatrists, deceived and captured billions of his citizens and transported them to Earth, stacking them around volcanoes before killing them with hydrogen bombs. According to Hubbard, the immortal spirits, or thetans, of these aliens can adhere to humans and cause spiritual harm, and auditing can free an individual from the influence of a thetan. I wonder if it's a coincidence that Hubbard was a sci-fi writer and the backstory of Scientology is evidently a fictitious sci-fi story, allegedly. When an individual has undergone enough auditing, which usually takes several years, and the auditor determines that they are free of engrams and of the influence of thetans, they are given the status of clear. Only at this point are they told the story of Xenu. Although they tried to keep the operating thetan text secret, obviously they have been leaked and are now very easy to find online. So what's with the secrecy? Why would Hubbard want to hide information that forms the core principles of Scientology from his followers? Money, of course. None of this information is given away for free, and Scientologists must pay for every single auditing session. Leah Remini, an actress and ex-Scientologist, stated that the cost of auditing is $800 an hour, and each session tends to last a minimum of 2.5 hours. Considering it usually takes Scientologists many years of auditing to attain the clear status, you can imagine how much money they had to spend to get there. In addition to auditing, they're expected to buy a package of books which costs them around $4,000, and whenever these are updated, they have to buy them all again. Then there are the courses required to reach spiritual actualization, known as the Bridge to Total Freedom. Each course costs around $650 and involves studying for 13 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like the books, the courses are often updated, so when a Scientologist reaches the top of the bridge, they have to repeat the courses, being told that there have been changes or mistakes were made the first time. There really is no end to this. You can't ever reach the top because they'll just send you back a few levels or invent new things that you have to learn, or to take more money from you. Leah Remini estimates that she spent around $5 million on Scientology. When she was 8 years old, her mother joined the church and raised her and her sister as Scientologists from there on. They both joined Scientology's paramilitary organisation called the Sea Organisation when Leah was 13, and they were forced to sign billion-year contracts and work to earn their keep. They didn't stay in the Sea Org for long, though remained Scientologists, and the whole family were working to pay the debt and future costs of the services. As I'm sure you've gathered, Scientology is an immensely profitable business. By 1957, Hubbard was paying himself the equivalent of over $2.6 million every year, a percentage of the church's gross income, and within the next 9 years, the church received a nationwide tax-exempt status. It would only take a couple of years after this for Hubbard to found Sea Org, and at this time, he publicly resigned from the Church of Scientology, though of course still received a significant amount of money from it. Hubbard enticed Scientologists to join Sea Org, which consisted of 3 ships, by painting it as a glamorous lifestyle for those of high operating thetan levels. The reality was much different though. Hardly anyone on the ships had any nautical experience, leading to a number of incidents which the crew were punished for, even though it was hardly their fault that they'd been accepted onto the ships and expected to carry out duties that they weren't adequately trained for. The crew were allegedly worked to the bone, with minimal food and other necessities. They weren't even allowed to wash or change their clothes for weeks, and of course conditions were even worse during punishment. There were reports of crew members being thrown overboard and confined in small spaces as punishment for minor mistakes. Hubbard and his ships unsuccessfully tried to establish safe havens in various countries, including Greece and Morocco, and eventually purchased the Fort Harrison Hotel in Clearwater, Florida as a land base. Their sights were set way beyond this one property though, and they planned to take over the whole city in a top-secret operation known as Project Normandy. Today, the Church of Scientology has a significant presence in Clearwater, with its members and affiliated companies owning around 185 properties covering 101 acres in the downtown centre. Anyway, by the time Hubbard had acquired the Fort Harrison Hotel, his health was seriously deteriorating thanks to various poor lifestyle choices. Regular legal threats caused him to spend a lot of the next few years in hiding, a paranoid mess. He was overweight, a chain smoker, reportedly drank a lot of alcohol, and took stimulants and antidepressants. To assist in his research, he claimed. He had poor hearing, poor vision, he suffered with bursitis, causing a prominent growth on his forehead, and a motorbike accident had resulted in serious injuries. Shortly after, he suffered a heart attack and remained in relatively poor health until his death in January 1986, the official cause being a stroke. You might be wondering how Hubbard, supposedly in his clear state, could succumb to such illnesses. Obviously, because it's all bullshit, allegedly. But he tried his best to hide the extent of his health problems, and when he died, high-ranking members of the church claimed that he simply chose to leave his body, reassuring those below that he would return one day. It's almost as cliché as the story of Xenu. Anyway, now the leader of Scientology was dead, of course someone needed to replace him, and that someone would be David Miscavige, former deputy to Hubbard. He had joined the Sea Org and eventually rose to a leadership position in the early 1980s, and in 1982 he married Michelle, or Shelly, Barnett, a fellow Sea Org member. The pair never had any children, because although Sea Org members were allowed to marry, they weren't allowed to remain in the organisation if they had children. Despite the church's public anti-abortion stance, several former members claimed they were advised or even forced to have an abortion. Members who had children prior to joining Sea Org would sign their children up to the Cadet Org. When joining Cadet Org, children as young as 6 years old would apparently sign the billion-year contracts, obviously having no idea what that even meant. They'd reportedly stay in dormitories with up to 100 other children, forced to work every day, be given little to no education, and only be allowed to see their parents once or twice a week. Both David and Shelly became members of Scientology as children after their families joined the church, though some family members later left. David's father, Ron Miscavige, left in 2012, and it was later reported that he had been under surveillance, with 2 private investigators watching him 24/7 for around a year and a half, apparently because David feared that Ron would reveal confidential information about the church. At some point during the surveillance, the investigators allegedly phoned David to tell him that they thought Ron was having a heart attack, and he told them not to intervene, coldly saying, "If it was Ron's time to die, let him die and don't intervene in any way." David's older brother, Ronnie Miscavige, left the church in 2000, and his daughter followed 5 years later. She has since spoken out against Scientology and published a book in 2013 describing her experience and how she escaped. Shelley's mother, Mary Florence Barnett, more commonly known as Flo, left the church after being a member for many years and became an independent Scientologist, joining the Advanced Ability Center, a breakaway organisation founded by David Mayer, who had left the church in 1983. This naturally would have led to her being classified as a suppressive person, which is a term Scientologists use to describe people they deem to be antisocial personalities. Hitler has been described as a suppressive person, but the label is not just reserved for people as evil as he was. Anyone who isn't a devout Scientologist can be branded an SP, including ex-members, the families and friends of current members who do not support the church, and anyone who speaks out against Scientology. So Flo's decision to not only leave the church, but to join a breakaway organisation was a big deal, and would have angered current members, particularly the leader, David, especially considering she took copies of confidential high-level material with her. Anyway, in September 1985, she was found dead at the age of 52. The cause was a gunshot wound to the head, and she had also been shot 3 times in the chest. Some have speculated that Flo was murdered because of her decision to leave, but it was officially ruled that she had taken her own life. Bob Havercroft, the LA Sheriff's Office detective who worked on the case at the time, later said that it was very, very, very unusual due to the 4 gunshot wounds, but stated that they had reconstructed the scene at the time and he was convinced that she had taken her own life. Marks on her wrist suggested that she had attempted something a few days prior too. After learning of Flo's death, David reportedly said, "That bitch got what she deserved," and Shelly said, "Well, good riddance to that bitch." This is far from the only death linked with Scientology that some have suspected foul play in, but we'll get into some other examples later on. Anyway, David's rise to power was a bit controversial, as Hubbard had never officially appointed him. He basically just awarded the position to himself. Apparently there was an order from Hubbard shortly before his death that promoted Pat Broker and his wife, one of the few people who were in direct contact with him in his final years, to the highest ranks, but David opposed this, claiming that the order had been forged. It sounds like David was a chip off the old block being Hubbard of course, and considering the various allegations made against him over the years that, if true, would suggest he's a very dangerous person, it'd hardly be surprising if other Scientologists were scared to go against him. Various ex-Scientologists have claimed that David physically assaulted them and others, suddenly erupting in a fit of rage and beating them for making minor mistakes, even as small as looking at him wrong, or simply just to keep them in check. In 2019, a former member who was born into Scientology filed a lawsuit against him for putting her through years of heinous abuse. She stated that her entire life was dictated and controlled by Scientology's abusive policies, procedures, and rules, and that she lived in strict, military-like conditions ever since she was a child, and endured sexually explicit verbal abuse from adults, which she was trained not to show any visible reaction to. As an adult, she claimed she had to work long hours for inadequate pay, and at one point was placed in solitary confinement for months with minimal contact with the outside world. In 2022, 3 other former members sued David, accusing him of trafficking them into Sea Org when they were minors and forcing them to provide unpaid labour and services for over a decade. They stated that they were not allowed to leave the ship and were routinely punished by being interrogated, humiliated, and imprisoned. David has also been investigated by the FBI regarding various allegations of criminal activity within Scientology, though he doesn't appear to have faced any consequences yet and has denied all allegations. There's a lot of speculation that various police departments have turned a blind eye to Scientology's alleged criminal activities, either because they are directly involved in Scientology or because Scientologists have paid or coerced them to keep quiet, but that is just speculation. When faced with allegations and lawsuits, Scientologists are reportedly taught to attack the attacker, a policy promoted by Hubbard, in which they are encouraged to respond to criticism aggressively, discrediting whoever speaks out against them, even going as far as to harass and intimidate them to silence them, allegedly. As for Shelly, Scientology sucked her in pretty deep too, but by all accounts, she was nowhere near as cruel or ruthless as David apparently was. Although she didn't always have the warmest interactions with those around her, particularly other women, it has been reported that she would try to calm David down when he was acting out. John Brousseau, who has known the couple for around 30 years, told Vanity Fair, "A lot of people will tell you about what a horrible bitch she was and how she was just as bad as David, which in a lot of respects is true. She was doing his bidding. But a lot of people who knew her personally will say that, underneath it all, she was actually a nice person." For many years, she was very involved with the church. She was David's official assistant and played a significant role in Scientology's liaison with actor Tom Cruise, reportedly even auditioning around 100 actresses to help him find a new girlfriend after he broke up with Penelope Cruz, who Shelly had guided through the detoxification program. David and Shelly have been described by ex-members as an odd couple. No one ever saw them hug or kiss, or show any affection whatsoever towards each other, and over time, there were clear signs of the marriage deteriorating. At one point, she apparently suspected he was having an affair with his personal communicator, Lou Henley Smith, though Valerie Haney, who was the couple's assistant and a friend of Shelly's, does not believe there was an affair. In 2004, a birthday party for Tom Cruise was held on one of the Sea Org cruise ships, and David and Shelly reportedly had an argument that ended with him publicly denigrating her. This wasn't the first time. Although there are no accounts of any physical abuse, former members have claimed to have seen him verbally abuse her on multiple occasions. Claire Headley, who worked closely with the couple, implied that Shelly had visibly changed, stating that she was cowed, always stressed, never slept, run ragged, and often in a bad mood. She said that's why some say they hated Shelly, but that she was never an evil person and seemed to really care. In 2005 or 2006, reports vary, Shelly decided it was time for a corporate reshuffling and reorganised the org board without David's permission. Although the couple would usually travel together for work-related duties, David had gone to Los Angeles alone to oversee the publishing of the latest Scientology book. According to some sources, he had temporarily returned to the international base where Shelly was, and he erupted in anger when he found out that she had taken it upon herself to appoint members to their new roles. When he went back to LA, she apparently followed him desperately in a car, then came right back soon after. Shortly after this, in preparation for renovations on the couple's living quarters, Shelly boxed up some of David's belongings to move them into storage. Perhaps she was trying to get back into David's good books, but that seemed to be an impossible goal. According to Vanity Fair, within days, former colleagues say, Shelly seemed to know she was living on borrowed time. She puttered about for maybe a week or two, being very sheepish and withdrawn, Brousseau recalls, not really contributing, telling her domestic staff not to bother taking care of her, that she could make her own meals. She'd say, "It's all right," and sort of be very undeserving, knowing that she was in a crapload of trouble. Mike Grinder, having just seen Miscavige, was cornered by Shelly. "She asked me whether he was wearing his platinum wedding ring or his gold one," Rinder says, like she didn't want to ask if he was still wearing his wedding ring. Sometime after, Shelly was reportedly seen in tears being escorted into a car. In November that year, Tom Cruise married Katie Holmes in a Scientology ceremony at a castle in Bracciano, Italy. The wedding had a $3 million budget, and it was a huge event, with many celebrities and, of course, fellow Scientologists attending. David was Tom's best man, but bizarrely, Shelly was nowhere to be seen. Everyone seemed to know better than to question where she was, apart from Leah Remini, who was told to shut up and mind her own business. David told her that Shelly was fine, but that he had to keep her away because suppressive people were trying to have her subpoenaed. Shelly had seemingly vanished, and members were just carrying on like she had never existed. Claudio Lugle, a fashion designer who worked for the couple, said he was told he didn't have to do Shelly's clothes anymore because she was on a special project. Leah grew even more concerned when she didn't receive a thank you note from Shelly at Christmas, as she always had. She continued to ask questions, but naturally this ruffled feathers. A number of reports had apparently been written on her regarding her behaviour at Tom Cruise's wedding. Scientologists were encouraged to telltale and grass on each other for the smallest of things, and Leah had to fly to Clearwater, Florida to be interrogated on these reports about her for 3 whole months. Because nothing in Scientology comes for free, even interrogation and harassment, Leah had to pay around $300 for all this to get reprogrammed. A few weeks after Shelly disappeared, John Brousseau claims that David's assistant Lou summoned him to Shelly's office in the Int base. He told Vanity Fair. Miscavige was standing there looking very impatient and irate, and he said to me, "Hey JB, can you break into here?" He was pointing to a sort of hidden panel that concealed a large walk-in closet with lockable file cabinets. Once you close and lock the panel, it looks just like a wall panel. He wanted me to break into it because I guess they didn't have the keys. Shelly was the only one who did. Immediately after he removed the panel, Brousseau says Miscavige told him to leave. A couple hours later, I get a call asking if I know how to pick locks, Brousseau continues. So I unlocked some of these file cabinets, and the minute I unlocked them, he said, No, leave them, you can leave. A couple weeks later, when Miscavige was no longer at the property, I was summoned by another office secretary. She said I could repair the lock and get it rekeyed with the exact same key and make it look like nothing had happened. This is all while Shelly was still under heavy investigation. According to Mike Rinder and Mark Rathbone, who have first-hand knowledge of such procedures, the investigation would have involved a sec check, in which security personnel would put her through repeated interrogations designed to elicit confessions, repentance, and submission. Sec checks are routinely administered for the smallest slight, sources say. Everything she said would have been relayed to her husband, who ultimately banished her to endure several months of auditing and reprogramming, Rathbone says, likely followed by several months of menial labour, until she finally evinced satisfactory degrees of contrition, obeisance, and clarity. The last time Shelly was ever seen in public was in August 2007 at her father's funeral, accompanied by a handler. It seems the only time she was briefly alone at the funeral was when she went to the bathroom, at which point a former Scientologist who had been declared a suppressive person approached her and asked her for help regarding her situation. Shelly apparently told the former member, "Listen to me, I fucked up, and I'm not going to be able to help you." By this time, Leah really began to feel that something wasn't right about all this. Her dedication to Scientology had started to wane after Tom Cruise's wedding, and she was now questioning everything. In August 2013, shortly after she left the church, she filed a missing persons report for Shelly with the Los Angeles Police Department, but the case was closed within hours and determined to be unfounded. When she questioned the LAPD about this, they refused to tell her anything other than that they had made contact with her and she didn't want to be found. They wouldn't even confirm that they'd actually seen Shelly. Make of that what you will, considering the LAPD's alleged ties to the church. There's actually some pretty suspicious information regarding this report that was revealed just last year, but we'll get into that later. At least one other missing persons report has been filed, though no information on Shelly's whereabouts has been released to the public. The Church of Scientology has not commented on Shelly's location, only stating that she is not missing and devotes her time to the work of Scientology. They hide any comments questioning her apparent disappearance on their social media accounts. So where is Shelly Miscavige? Perhaps the most widely believed theory among former members is that she is at the Twin Peaks base, located outside Los Angeles. This base is part of the Church of Spiritual Technology wing, which is in charge of copyrights and archival work. It reportedly contains a luxurious log cabin that was built for L. Ron Hubbard if and when he returns, and another structure for the highest level members, like David and Tom Cruise, a shelter in the event of a nuclear Armageddon. There are around 24 highly qualified Sea Org members who live there full-time, and no one else ever really gains access to it. To be working at Twin Peaks is considered an honour, is one of the highest promotions a Sea Org member can get. Dylan Gill, a former Sea Org member who oversaw a lot of the construction of the base and spent 7 years there himself, implied that security is very tight. There are armed guards, infrared cameras, and spiked fences. He said it's isolated and you don't really have contact with other Scientologists at all. Mail and phone calls are monitored. He added, "It's a good way to have somebody disappear." Some have speculated that Shelly is being held there against her will, but it's entirely possible that she wants to be there. Former Scientologist Aaron Smith Levin pointed out that if Shelly is there as a punishment, she's the only one. You don't get punished by being sent to Twin Peaks, it's an honour. It's important to remember that from a young age, Scientology is all Shelly's ever known. She was indoctrinated and brainwashed. It's certainly not impossible that she is still brainwashed, and regardless of the apparent deterioration of her marriage, is still totally dedicated to Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, convinced he will return one day. The problem I have with this is that by all accounts, David was not happy with Shelly shortly before her disappearance, and Shelly seemed to know it. Her behaviour around that time, and her apparently telling the former member at her father's funeral that she fucked up, all supports this. It might be true that Shelly would voluntarily stay at the Twin Peaks base to dedicate her time to Scientology, but why would David send her there? She said it herself, she fucked up, so why would she be given the honour of working at such a prestigious base? Aaron Levin Smith acknowledged that transferring her to the base would have been an extremely convenient way of isolating her from other Sea Org members, but that doesn't mean that she doesn't want to be there. Some former members have noted that Shelly was lonely, and despite her cold exterior at times, it seemed that she was desperate for companionship. One recalled a time that they asked if she wanted to hang out with them, and to their surprise she accepted, and later referred to them as her best friend, even though they didn't really know each other. She might be very dedicated to Scientology, but would she freely choose to live at a base where she's seemingly isolated from everyone else if she was already lonely before? I guess it's possible that David wanted her out of the way and convinced her that she was being given an honorary role at the Twin Peaks base, in which case her dedication to Scientology might have outweighed her loneliness. But her telling someone she fucked up really doesn't seem to align with this. Surely she'd be happy, proud even, if she'd been convinced that the transfer to Twin Peaks was a positive thing. The idea that Shelly is voluntarily isolating herself anywhere, Twin Peaks or elsewhere, doesn't really make sense to me. Why would Shelly go from being the First Lady of Scientology, from being seen at public events, from travelling with her husband for Scientology duties, to suddenly deciding to never even show her face? She has not been seen in public for 17 years now. That is absolutely insane. No Scientologists who have left the church since have reported seeing her since 2007. No journalist has snapped a photo of her. No one has had a video call with her. She has had absolutely no contact with the outside world in 17 years. Regardless of where she is, and if she's there voluntarily or not, on the outside this looks suspicious as hell. If Shelly is alive and well, why wouldn't the Church of Scientology prove this? Considering the lengths they will allegedly go to protect their reputation, including harassment, filing lawsuits, attempting to scrub the internet of any information that reflects badly on them, why wouldn't they have Shelly make a public appearance, or even release a video featuring her, anything to prove that she is okay? Maybe because she isn't. The theories I'm about to cover are just theories, not facts. I don't even necessarily believe them. I'm just speculating based on information I found online. Let's go from best case scenario to worst case scenario. Given that there are a few things that don't add up if Shelly is perfectly fine and is choosing to isolate herself, if that isn't the case, it stands to reason that she might be held somewhere against her will. But why? As we already covered, there have been countless serious allegations made against the Church of Scientology. It's clear that the church is a compartmentalized organisation. Members are on a need-to-know, or in many cases, pay-to-know basis. Those who are at the bottom often have no idea what's going on in the next level up, never mind what's happening at the top. Many members won't even know as much information as we know as outsiders. They don't get told anything by anyone higher up, and they're taught to avoid anti-Scientology information or news online. So if members are even aware of the allegations against the church, many of them certainly don't have insider knowledge. The same can't be said for Shelly though. She likely knew a lot of potentially incriminating information. There are probably few people, apart from David of course, and perhaps a couple of other very high-ranking members, who knew anywhere near as much as Shelly did. In the words of Mark Headley, she's probably the one person who could just end it tomorrow. If she just walked away from the whole craziness and said, okay, this is where all the fucking bodies are buried, this is what he did with this is what he did with that, let's fucking burn it down, it would be done. Shelly's level of clearance obviously worked in her favour for quite some time, but it could also work against her if she was suspected of being a threat to the church. We know that she had angered David shortly before her disappearance by acting without his permission. That wouldn't have sat well with him. Perhaps he worried that she was stepping out of line, starting to question her faith, or even planning to overthrow him. She had worked directly with L. Ron Hubbard, giving her a significant level of moral authority among Scientologists who have a lot of respect for and are even in awe of anyone who was that close to him. Mike Grinder and Tom DeVocht both said that if anyone could incite a mutiny against David, it would be Shelly. This would ruin David and could be the beginning of the end of Scientology. Various former members have spoken out and revealed many dark secrets that the church tries to conceal from the public and its own members, but it'd be on a whole new level if the wife of the leader started talking. That's a risk not worth taking. Keeping someone locked up in a highly guarded base, allowing no contact with the outside world, is a pretty good way to prevent them from spilling your secrets. If this is what's happening, it's possible that Shelly is the only person that was ever sent to Twin Peaks for punishment and to silence her. Or she could be at one of the church's other bases. Which one is anyone's guess. By far the most concerning location that has been suggested is the Hole. The Hole is the name of a detention building at the INT base in Riverside County, California. From 2004, this was where members of senior management were sent as punishment, sometimes for months or even years at a time, and the conditions they were kept in were horrific. According to Wikipedia, from 2004 to 2007, the number of people confined in the Hole increased from 40 to up to 100. They slept in cots or sleeping bags, squeezed into every available floor space or on desktops. Men would sleep around the conference table, while women slept in cubicles and small offices around the main conference room. They were so crowded that there was barely any room to move, according to one of those present. Everyone is sleeping with only about 6 inches on either side, above you, below you. Getting up in the middle of the night, you'd disturb everyone. They were only allowed to leave to attend Scientology events or to be taken to a shower in a nearby maintenance garage, to which they were taken 2 at a time under guard. Food was brought to them on golf carts from the gold-based mess hall, as the executives were not allowed to eat with the rest of the staff, and they were only given 10 to 15 minutes to eat. According to one of the executives, the food was like leftovers, slop, bits of meat, soupy kind of leftovers thrown into a pot and cooked and barely edible. The building was said to be infested with ants, and on several occasions the electricity was turned off, causing the temperature inside to reach 106 degrees Fahrenheit or 41 degrees Celsius due to the lack of air conditioning. Inspired by L. Ron Hubbard throwing crew members overboard on Sea Org ships, as I mentioned earlier in the video, David would allegedly take people from the hull in the middle of the night and force them to jump into the swimming pool or the muddy lake, or just push them in while they were fully clothed and often in freezing conditions. They'd be left in their soaking clothes for a long time after while they thought about what they did wrong. Former Scientologist Debbie Cook filed a lawsuit against the church over the way she'd been treated over the years. She claimed that one night she was talking on the phone with David, him berating her on her poor performance, when there was a knock at the door. She chose to ignore it because she didn't want to be rude to David, and the next thing she knew, 2 other members broke into her room to take her away to the hole. She stayed there for 7 weeks and described various examples of abuse and mistreatment, including being forced to stand in a rubbish bin for 12 hours straight, while other members screamed at her and poured water on her, and being slapped by one of David's female assistants so hard that she fell over some chairs. Additionally, Debbie claimed that David told another of his assistants to break her finger. When a fellow executive spoke out about the abuse he'd seen in the hole, he was reportedly taken into a separate room and beaten by 3 men for 2 hours and forced to lick the bathroom floor for 30 minutes. The people in the hole were treated worse than prisoners, and the reasons they were sent there were usually pretty minor, for example because they'd been slightly underperforming recently. After former members began speaking out about the hole, to the media and the FBI, conditions were somewhat improved to avoid further bad publicity. The reforms included members being given proper beds to sleep in and being given 30-minute breaks to eat breakfast, lunch and dinner. It sounds like just enough improvements were made so that the risk of someone actually dying in there was minimised, but the conditions were still harsh, and other members were ordered not to associate with members who were in the hole. Interestingly, there is another Scientologist who went missing under vaguely comparable circumstances to Shelly, and whose last known location was the hole. Heber Jentzsch served as the president of the Church of Scientology International from 1982 to around 2010. Prior to this, he had been the church's chief press spokesman, and he had been the one to announce L. Ron Hubbard's death to the press. In 1978, he married Karen de la Carrière, a fellow Scientologist, and the pair had a child together, Alexander. However, for whatever reason, David didn't like Karen and apparently pressured Heber to divorce her. He also sent her to the INT base and interrogated her on her crimes for 6 months, as well as allegedly being forced to run laps around a pool for 12 hours a day as punishment. In 1988, Heber and Karen divorced, and she left the church in 2010, publicly accusing them of breaking up her family, claiming that the church had almost completely cut off their son Alexander from his father. By this time, Heber, who had once been a very public figure, had stopped making public appearances in the early 2000s. It's not clear exactly what Heber had done wrong, but he'd certainly done something, and around 2004, he became one of the earliest, and in the end, became one of the longest-serving prisoners of the whole. Karen claims that Heber was allowed to visit his son Alexander for 1 day in 2010. I wonder if this was only an attempt to dispute her claims that Scientology had broken up the family. Alexander had given Heber a mobile phone so they could keep in contact, but when Alexander tried to call the number later that year, it had been disconnected. Around this time, Scientology removed Heber's biography from its website, and there has been no official mention of his name ever since. This 1 day in 2010 was the last time Alexander ever saw his father, and in July 2012, he died from pneumonia at the age of 27. Alexander had stood by the church when Karen left, and he tried to treat his pneumonia with Scientology-approved methods, which clearly didn't work. Karen claimed that Alexander's wife, also a Scientologist, prevented her from seeing his body at the morgue, and she was also not invited to his memorial, which was held at the Scientology Celebrity Center in Los Angeles. Heber did attend though, and this was the first time he'd been seen in public in almost a decade. Kind of a similar situation to Shelly, whose last public appearance was her father's funeral. Perhaps funerals are the only reason a suppressive person is allowed to leave. Shortly after Alexander's death, Heber's brother spoke with former Scientologist Tony Ortega, who posted the following on his website. David Jensch, 80, tells me that the last time he spoke to his brother Heber, 76, was about 3 years ago, and at that time he urged his brother to break out of Scientology's international base. He said, "I don't think I can ever get out of here," but I told him, "You have to try," and the last thing he said to me was, "I'll never get out of here alive." Since then, David says, the workers at the base have refused to take his call. They won't let me talk to him. Heber just lost his son, Alexander, David explains. I called and told them I'd like to talk to my brother about this. They told me, "You can't come, we don't want you here." I told them I'd come down there and they'd have to let me see him, but they said, "Heber is not going to be able to talk to you, so it's best that you don't come." David didn't know that his brother had been let out of the base for a rare visit to Los Angeles and a hastily arranged memorial for his son last week. I wish I'd known that. I would have been there to try to see him. In May 2018, Heber's niece, Tammy, who wasn't particularly close with him but did occasionally exchange letters with him, received a letter in response to the one she'd sent 6 months prior. In the letter, Heber explained how he'd celebrated his 80th birthday and went on to say that he had led a very exciting and fulfilling life and that he is rich in memories and friends. He also mentioned that he still tries to work a bit each day, for a couple of hours, because he felt that it keeps him active in his 83rd year and he enjoys it immensely. Tammy questioned whether the letter had even been written by Heber. In her letter, she had reminisced on some old memories with him when she was a child, and had asked if he was aware of her father's death, and he didn't even acknowledge these things in his reply. Karen also doubted the letter's authenticity, claiming that credible accounts had reached her that Heber had suffered a massive stroke in recent years and was in no shape to even put pen to paper. Furthermore, it's all a bit suspicious that Heber went from being a major name in Scientology, the public face of it even, considering he was the one who corresponded with the press, to being imprisoned in the hole for unknown reasons, implying that he wanted out to his brother, but that his life would be at risk if he tried to escape. And now all of a sudden, he's having a normal, happy and carefree retirement, working only a couple of hours a day through his own choice. He was allegedly prevented from seeing his son years ago, but in the letter, he talks about celebrating with a number of his family and friends. I just don't buy it personally. After hearing about the alleged stroke, Tammy contacted the Riverside County Sheriff's Department and asked if they could do a welfare check on Heber. She told them she wanted to be there and informed them that she would arrive on the 5th of June 2018. But although they never told her that it wouldn't be possible for her to be present and even arranged to meet her on the 5th, it seems they did try to go behind her back to make sure she wouldn't be there at the time. First, they attempted the welfare check the night before she told them she would arrive, but they were told that Heber was at a doctor's appointment. The next day, Tammy arrived at the INT base, but the sheriff's deputy was nowhere to be seen and the place appeared deserted. Sometime after, the deputy came out of the base, having already done the welfare check alone. He stated that Heber had been accompanied by a woman named Nettie Alcock, who claimed to be his full-time nurse and remained with him the whole time the deputy was there. Mike Grinder refuted this claim, stating that he personally knew Nettie, who had been in the Sea Org since she was 16, and that she'd never been trained as a nurse, nor did she have a license, implying the reality was that Nettie was Heber's handler, not his nurse. The deputy told Tammy that Heber had said he was enjoying his retirement and that he was absolutely fine. The most baffling part of this welfare check is that the deputy said that Tammy was not allowed to see her uncle because he claimed he didn't know her. This was literally a month after she had received the letter from him, leaving only 3 possibilities. Heber had suddenly forgot the existence of his own niece within the space of a month. Heber was told to lie and say he didn't know who Tammy was, or Heber had never received any of the letters that Tammy had written him, and the replies she received were written by someone else. Tammy implies that she was harassed as a result of her attempt to visit her uncle, and claims she received letters from attorneys and that private investigators visited her and her elderly mother. So make of all this what you will. Anyway, back to Shelly. Could she have been kept in the hole this whole time? I personally think it's very unlikely. I wouldn't rule out her being kept in similar conditions, but there'd be far too much talk if she was kept around other members, and there'd always be the risk of her revealing top-level secrets to other members who may themselves leave the church one day. None of the Scientologists who left the church since have said they saw or even heard that she was in the hole. It'd make a lot more sense to keep her isolated from everyone so she can't reveal classified information, and so no one else can leave and reveal what happened to her. Another possible reason they might be isolating Shelly is because she became ill and they don't want anyone knowing. As mentioned earlier in the video, Scientology teaches that auditing can cure any illness, mental or physical. Obviously this isn't the case, and there are various examples of people literally dying because they were encouraged to rely on auditing and other pseudo-scientific medical advice rather than legit medicine. Yvonne Gillam, Heber Gentsch's second wife, died of a brain tumour that would have been operable if she had visited a doctor sooner, and she refused to take painkillers in case it interfered with her auditing. Jet Travolta, John Travolta's son, died at the age of 16 while on holiday with John and his wife after suffering a seizure. He had been taken off his seizure meds sometime prior. Lisa McPherson suffered a breakdown in 1995, and it was decided she would be treated with what is known as the introspection rundown, which basically consists of solitary confinement and vitamins. She fell into a coma and died on the way to a hospital where the plan was to take her to see a doctor who was affiliated with Scientology. The medical examiner determined that her cause of death was a pulmonary embolus caused by the worst case of dehydration he'd ever seen. Turns out she'd allegedly been deprived of liquids for 5 days, and the file documenting the treatment had been destroyed. Frank Vitkovic was the perpetrator of a mass shooting in Australia in 1987, killing 8 people and injuring 5 others before he died trying to escape. A couple of months prior, he'd taken a Scientology personality test, which had revealed that he was extremely depressed. In fact, he had the second worst result that the test administrator had ever seen, yet they made no effort to get any professional help for him. I don't think Frank was officially a Scientologist, so they probably didn't try to treat him at all, but it does go to show the result of Scientology's opposition to psychiatric help. An auditor suffered a breakdown after being labelled a suppressive person, and Scientologists decided to punish him and force him to do manual labour rather than getting him professional help. He escaped and killed his wife before taking his own life. The father of Kyle Brennan, a 20-year-old man who was on antidepressants, was ordered to take away the medication, and the young man ended up taking his own life shortly after. All these cases go to show that Scientologists are not immune from illnesses, and when auditing and other so-called treatments are used in place of legit medical care, the consequences can be devastating. I'm sure Scientologists could attempt to explain some of the aforementioned cases by claiming those who died hadn't yet received enough auditing, or even by blaming them. Maybe they weren't totally committed to the sessions, but it'd be a lot harder to explain Shelly becoming ill. She's the leader's wife, so if auditing didn't work for her, or if she isn't committed enough, then who is? They already had to explain away L. Ron Hubbard's death by saying he chose to leave his body, and he claimed his poor health prior to his death was because he was at such a high power level that he couldn't get back down to the level of a body. This is obviously contradictory anyway. Either all illness can be cured by achieving a high level, or illness is caused by a high level. You can't have it both ways. Regardless, it wouldn't exactly look great on David if they explained Shelly's hypothetical illness in the same way, because that would imply she was operating at a higher power level than he was, and if that was the case, why wasn't Shelly the leader and David her assistant? While there have been no confirmed sightings of Shelly since 2007, in December 2016, an anonymous woman and her husband claimed to have seen a frail and dishevelled woman accompanied by 2 male handlers in Crestline, the closest town to Twin Peaks. They were 90% sure that this woman was Shelly. The couple said the woman had long, stringy, greying hair, and the 2 men looked to be in their 30s. Quote, "They seemed to be leading her, like you would someone who was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. It was awkward. My attention was never on them. My attention was on her. This was what I do for a living, work with people who were in that kind of shape. And I thought that this woman was not supposed to be there. It was disturbing." At the time of this possible sighting, Shelly would have been 55 years old. It was 9 years after she disappeared, so of course she would have aged a bit in that time, but surely not enough to explain the description of the state she was in if she was perfectly healthy. That suggests she really wasn't well, either mentally or physically or both. Of course it's possible that the couple were mistaken and that the woman they saw wasn't Shelly. There's really no way of knowing. Personally, I find this theory to be one of the more plausible ones. It doesn't make sense to me that Shelly would willingly choose to isolate herself for no good reason, especially considering all the rumours and accusations that her disappearance sparked. It's worth remembering the similarities between Shelly's disappearance and the somewhat disappearance of Heber Jentzsch. Both were once public figures who vanished from the public eye after seemingly angering David, reappearing only once for the funerals of family members. Heber was apparently kept in the hole for years, God knows why, but it seems likely that at some point before 2018, he suffered a stroke that Scientology clearly doesn't want the public or its own members to know about. So is it beyond the realm of possibility that Shelly was also punished and isolated in the first place, like Heber, either because she did something wrong, or because David was worried about her divulging Scientology secrets, then she developed some kind of illness, and that's why they decided to keep her isolated ever since? Alternatively, perhaps there was a valid reason for Shelly not attending Tom Cruise's wedding, and it was the death of her father that caused her mental health to deteriorate. Not everyone is convinced that Shelly is even alive right now, though. For the same reasons that people have speculated she is being held somewhere against her will, namely to punish or silence her, others are convinced that she has been murdered. There have been a number of suspicious deaths related to Scientology, leading some to believe that certain members, perhaps ordered by those at the top, have murdered suppressive people to silence them. Once again, this is all just speculation, not fact. I'm just summarising information I found online and don't necessarily believe any of this myself, but here are a few examples. In 2006, Sean Lonsdale started filming Scientologists outside their offices in Clearwater and aired the footage on public access television, claiming the church was a cult. He'd had various arguments with members, one of which even got physical. The church then hired a private investigator to dig up any information on Sean that they could use to destroy his reputation, a tactic allegedly commonly used against anyone who speaks out against them. The investigator found that Sean had 2 misdemeanor convictions from 1999 and 2000 for engaging in certain activities with men in public. The church is apparently known for its homophobic views, and so they likely thought that they hit the jackpot with this. They printed posters with his mugshot mentioning his convictions and posted them around the city, and also contacted his landlord and his employer to warn them that he was a dangerous person. In February 2008, Sean was found dead at the age of 39. Police found a garden hose that led from his car to his house, and it was determined that he had taken his own life. L. Ron Hubbard's own son, Quentin, died under somewhat similar circumstances after he had publicly mocked his father, calling him crazy and claiming that auditing didn't work and that Hubbard fabricated the results. At the time, Quentin was actually a top-level auditor and was supposed to take Hubbard's place when he died. It's not clear if Quentin ever truly believed in Scientology. If he did, it seems he eventually woke up and didn't want to be a part of it anymore. He was stripped of his credentials and told he had to start from the bottom again, and shortly after, he vanished from the base in Clearwater, leaving a bizarre note claiming that he was leaving to go to Area 51 and fly spaceships. Hubbard sent 300 members of the Guardian's office, the department responsible for legal affairs and investigations, to look for Quentin. Eventually, the Las Vegas police found him unconscious in his car with the engine still running and a tube connected to the exhaust pipe. It was determined that he had had contact with another man sometime before he was found. It's not clear whether or not this contact was consensual. Quentin remained in a coma for 2 weeks until he died on the 12th of November 1976. When Hubbard heard the news, he reportedly said, "That little shit has done it to me again." He apparently believed that someone had murdered Quentin to get at him. An autopsy determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation from carbon monoxide, and his mother requested 3 more autopsies to be performed, the last of which came back inconclusive. In 1970, 22-year-old Susan Meister joined the church and transferred to the Sea Org the following year. Within just a few months, she died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, according to church officials. Her father George flew to Morocco, where the ship Susan had been on was based at the time, but his request to see her body was denied, and they would only show him a photo. The photo showed Susan still holding the gun, with a shot in the head, and George didn't think it would have been possible for her to do that to herself and still hold on to the gun. It took months for her to be transported back to the US, during which time George fought with Scientology over the body. When her body arrived in the US, Scientology offered George a settlement, which he rejected, questioning if there was more to her death than they'd let on. Why would they offer him a settlement if she really had taken her own life? He later claimed that he and his wife began receiving threatening phone calls from withheld numbers, warning that they'd meet the same fate as their daughter. I mentioned the death of Kyle Brennan earlier in the video that occurred after his father had withheld his antidepressants, but turns out there are some strange details that have caused some to wonder if he really did take his own life or if he was murdered. Kyle's body was found on the floor of his father's bedroom, and the bedding was stripped from the bed. Kyle had used his father's gun, but his fingerprints were not found on it, and the bullet that killed him was nowhere to be seen. When his father, Tom, returned home and found Kyle's body, rather than calling the police, he called Denise Gentile, David Miscavige's twin sister, who was also a Scientologist, and spoke to her for around 45 minutes. Tom's initial version of the events of that day would have placed him at home at the time of Kyle's death. He later claimed that he was mistaken and that he had actually returned 50 minutes after the first time he had given. Denise's husband Jerry's statements were also inconsistent. At first he told Scientology's Office of Special Affairs that he and Denise went to Tom's apartment after learning of Kyle's death, then later, while under oath, claimed that only he had gone to the apartment without Denise. Kyle's laptop was nowhere to be found when police searched Tom's home. It didn't reappear until weeks later when Tom gave it to the family. Everything on it had been wiped. There are certainly some suspicious details about these deaths, but I'll let you decide what you think really happened. As for Shelly, I personally think it's unlikely that she was murdered to silence her. Although the church allegedly goes to extreme lengths to silence and punish people, and there have been a number of deaths that occurred that could be blamed on them due to alleged negligence and abuse, it doesn't really seem their style to actually murder people. They tend to just imprison them in the hole for years instead, reportedly subjecting them to physical and psychological abuse to destroy any courage they might have had to speak out against the church. There have been a number of former high-level members, like Mike Rinder, who have left the church and revealed some very damaging information, but I'm not aware of anyone on that level who's died under mysterious circumstances. That said, Shelly would have inevitably known a lot more than almost anyone else. As Mark Headley said, she's probably the only person that could just end it all tomorrow. It's also worth noting that a number of the former members had to actually escape. For example, Valerie Haney hid in the boot of an actor's car during a film shoot. Others were able to leave the church because they weren't actually positioned at one of the bases, but it's not like people were able to just waltz out of the hole and walk free. Who knows what would have happened to some of them if they never had the chance to escape, and Shelly probably never had that chance. If Shelly is dead, perhaps a more plausible theory would be that she was killed accidentally. David was known to fly into fits of rage over small triggers, and there are numerous reports of him beating high-level members as punishment. No one noticed any physical violence between Shelly and David, but with her being such a prominent figure prior to her disappearance, would he have risked it? It's not going to look great if the leader's wife is always covered in unexplained bruises, and just because there weren't any obvious signs doesn't mean there wasn't anything going on behind closed doors. There are many ways that one can be physically abusive that don't include punching someone in the face. Regardless, with Shelly out of the public eye and away from the other members, David wouldn't have had to worry about visible bruises. His own father said he didn't have a conscience, so without the deterrence of people finding out, would there be any reason for him to suppress his anger towards her? Furthermore, who knows what conditions she had been kept in all these years, and if those conditions could have led to her death. Perhaps she met the same fate as Lisa McPherson. The problem with the theories of Shelly being dead, though, is that there are no reports of her dying. That might sound an obvious thing to say, but even with the immense power the church has, and the alleged corruption within various police departments who apparently have ties with the church, it'd be pretty difficult to pull this off. Could they have murdered her and made it look like an accident? Perhaps, but it's a lot harder to totally cover up that she died in the first place, especially considering she was a public figure and people are trying to locate her. Have they pulled this off with anyone else? Maybe. Mike Rinder claimed that there may be around 10 to 15 people still in the hole who have been there for years and their identities are unknown. Who knows if they're even still alive? It doesn't sound like anyone is looking for them. Whatever the reason for Shelly's disappearance, it seems that something happened in 2006 that led David to want to keep her out of the public eye. Whether that was because she became ill or because she angered him in some way, I don't know. She is likely still alive, but personally, I can't confidently say I believe she is well. There was a possible sighting of her sometime between 2008 and 2013. An unidentified individual who knew Shelly personally claimed to have seen her with 3 other Sea Org members in a cafe in Redlands, about 35 minutes away from Crestline. The individual said that they all, quote, seemed relaxed and appeared to be having a good time. But this person pointed out, quote, most likely this was long before the interminable nature of her isolation had set in. The range of time that this sighting could have occurred is quite broad. 2008 would be the year after Shelly's last confirmed public appearance, and 2013 was the year Leah Remini filed the missing persons report. On the note of the missing persons report, I'm going to round off this video with some concerning information that was revealed last year. Yashar Ali, a journalist who has been investigating Scientology for years, wrote an article detailing some of his findings. Here are a few excerpts. On Thursday, August 8, 2013, just after 5 p.m, 2 Los Angeles Police Department detectives travelled down California Highway 210 toward a coffee shop. They were headed to rendezvous with a woman whose friend, a famous actress, had reported her missing after not hearing from her for over 7 years. The woman also hadn't been seen or heard from by people she had known for decades. The meeting was arranged by an attorney for the missing woman. It was scheduled after a short period of rapid negotiation about where the woman would agree to meet the detectives and what she would agree to do when she met them. As they pulled up to the coffee shop, the detectives faced a woman who said she was Shelly Miscavige, the wife of Scientology's leader, David Miscavige. Jeffrey Riffer, a longtime attorney for Scientology, accompanied the woman. The detectives checked her ID, took her fingerprints, and returned to LAPD headquarters. The next day, 2 LAPD lab technicians determined that the fingerprints taken at the coffee shop could not definitively be matched to the fingerprints the California DMV had on record for Shelly. Instead of contacting Shelly's attorney to arrange for another set of prints to be taken, the LAPD removed her from the missing persons database, closed the investigation, and issued a press statement saying that the missing persons report had been unfounded. Fingerprint experts who examined the prints told me that the technicians shouldn't have even attempted to match the fingerprints. The prints taken by LAPD detectives weren't of a high enough quality to conduct a match. Without prior knowledge about the subject of my story or her association with Scientology, one of the experts I interviewed asked if the person who had provided their fingerprint had been trained to intentionally leave a fingerprint that wouldn't be suitable for a match. This alarming lapse, which has never been reported before, is just one piece of a larger story that reveals that the LAPD has repeatedly disregarded standard law enforcement procedures to protect Scientology. Not getting a second set of prints from the woman claiming to be Shelly was just one of the things that the LAPD didn't do in this case, that at best would involve incompetence and negligence, and at worst, that certain LAPD employees were engaged in a conspiracy to protect Scientology from law enforcement action. Days later, for unknown reasons, and even though the missing persons investigation into Shelly had been closed out, the detectives contacted the coffee shop to obtain security camera footage from the meeting. When the coffee shop sent the footage over a week later, the videos for all the cameras were inexplicably scrambled. As part of reporting this story, I reviewed the footage and confirmed that it was unusable for any investigative purpose. My sources, along with a review of documents, told me that Shelly was not informed that she was the subject of a missing persons report by the LAPD detectives and that Remini was the one who filed it. There is also no indication that they ascertained why she was missing or what led her to withdraw so severely from life and her friends. This recent update is really quite significant. The exact details of how the missing persons report had concluded as unfounded were initially unknown. At first it wasn't even clear if the LAPD had actually seen Shelly, and now it still isn't clear. Imagine responding to a missing persons report from someone who is seriously concerned about that person's safety. You take their fingerprints, which don't conclusively match the prints you have on record, and rather than investigating further, you just close the case and have done with it. It really doesn't look good on the LAPD after all the allegations regarding corruption and their ties with Scientology. So did the detectives really meet with Shelly that day, or someone pretending to be her? I suppose we'll never know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and theories in the comments. What do you think happened to Shelly Miscavige? If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.